On the line with us, Evan Greer. Evan is the campaign director of Fight for the Future and an internationally touring musician and speaker. She writes regularly for The Guardian, Time, Newsweek, etc. The website is verizonprotests.com. Evan, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Tell us about Fight for the Future and what y'all are doing to fight back against this Verizon lawyer turned FCC commissioner, head guy, whatever, Ajit Pai.
Sure. So Fight for the Future is a nonprofit that's been working to protect the internet as a platform for freedom of expression, creativity, and social change. We're pretty busy right now, as folks might imagine. I'm sure everyone's been seeing the news of, as you said, this Verizon lawyer who's now running the FCC, trying to get rid of net neutrality. Now, you may still be asking, what is net neutrality? Net neutrality is essentially the First Amendment of the internet. It's what prevents big cable companies like Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T from engaging in censorship and otherwise controlling what we see and do online. So the FCC just announced this sort of official final call for a vote on this. It's going to be coming up on December 14th. So we're basically doing two major things. One is we're encouraging everyone to call their lawmakers right now through our website at battleforthenet.com. More than 200,000 people have done that in just the last 24 hours alone. So there's a huge public backlash happening right now. But we need to get this into member of Congress's local districts right in their backyards to put pressure on them. So we're organizing protests across the country at Verizon retail stores, shining a light on the corruption that's happening here, where we have a top guy from Verizon running the agency that's supposed to be overseeing them. So these protests are going to be across the country. You can find one near you or sign up to host one at verizonprotests.com, as you said.
So are you getting any feedback from any members of Congress that this is working? Has anybody reported back that I'm assuming this has become largely a partisan issue, that Democrats are in favor of net neutrality, Republicans are opposed to it?
So outside of Washington, D.C., this is not a partisan issue at all. Polling actually shows that more than 73% of Republican voters support the existing net neutrality rules, more than 80% of Democrats. It's actually one of the few issues that basically everyone agrees on, unless they're a lobbyist for one of these big telecom companies. And that's what really gives us opportunity here. Inside Washington, D.C., those same lobbyists have been working really hard to make it partisan. And so that's why it's extra important that folks are reaching out to Republican lawmakers right now. They need to understand that their own base is not with them on this. And there actually are some cracks in the wall. We're hearing that the calls are making a difference and that there are Republicans that are considering speaking out on this and saying that this is not the right direction for the FCC to be heading. So that makes it all the more important that people are getting out in the streets, making those phone calls, because this chairman of the FCC, he's a Republican chairman. He's most likely to listen to members from his own party. That makes it an uphill battle for us to push back against that misinformation coming from the cable lobby and make sure that we make it clear this is not a partisan issue. It's a basic free speech issue that everyone can agree on.
Yeah. Although it seems that the Republican Party is much more vulnerable to big money these days. Not to say that there aren't some Democrats who are as well, but any particular Republicans that are maybe inclined to be allies, or that might be in tight electoral situations where this might be something that could, enough pressure could push their a change in their, well, actually, I was going to say a change in their vote. To the best of my knowledge, there's not even legislation that would override the FCC, is there?
So this is where this gets a little bit complicated, and it's important that people understand this. So we're not calling for Congress to legislate on this issue right now at all. That would be a terrible idea. As you just said, our Congress is extremely susceptible to money from big companies. And the very same companies that are trying to kill net neutrality have been giving hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions to lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans. So legislation on net neutrality right now would be a disaster. It would likely undermine the FCC rules that we have on the books and essentially permanently put a nail in the coffin of net neutrality. So instead of legislation, what we need Congress to do is exercise their oversight authority over the FCC and step in and demand that the FCC slow down or abandon this incredibly unpopular plan to gut the rules that are on the books right now. There's absolutely no reason to get rid of those rules, and Congress should be doing their job in making sure that the FCC isn't rushing toward a vote when it has no evidence or any reason to do so other than to give a big handout to these giant telecom companies.
Right, but I've been hearing about oversight my whole life. I remember when there was going to be an attempted effort by the FDA to regulate tobacco back in the 90s. And, I believe it was an oversight hearing about the FDA that caused them to bring in, I may be wrong on that, but that was my recollection, to bring in those 7 tobacco industry executives who all just basically lied to Congress. I mean, are there any teeth to congressional oversight?
With the FCC, there definitely is. And again, this is more about, what's important here is that if Ajit Pai starts getting flack from his own party, from Republican members of Congress, they're telling him, look, this is becoming a problem for us. This is going to be an issue for us in the election. That's when he starts to slow down, right? So there's political considerations here as well as kind of concrete legislative mechanisms. But you're absolutely right. Congressional oversight of federal agencies often is a joke, or is pushing in the other direction where Congress is actually trying to pull back federal agencies when they're trying to do something good for the public.
Right.
But in this case, it's a simple situation where the more calls we can get into members of Congress, the more we can lay this at their feet and make it clear to them that if they sit back and don't speak out and allow this rogue federal agency that's blatantly acting against the interests of their constituents, that they'll be to blame, and that we won't let them get away with it, and we won't forget it come election time.
How is it that a former lawyer for Verizon ends up the head of the FCC?
Well, unfortunately, many federal agencies have that revolving door between industry and sort of government. It's actually not a new problem either. It's important, and I think that speaks to how this is not a partisan issue. If you recall, the last time we had this big debate, the chairman of the FCC, who was appointed by President Obama, also used to work as a top cable lobbyist. He was heading in the wrong direction as well until there was massive outcry from people from across the political spectrum, millions of internet users speaking out, calling their lawmakers, calling the FCC, was what got him to turn around. So this is not a new problem, and it wasn't President Obama that put these rules into place. They were fought for, again, by millions of people, and who fought an uphill battle because there was a former cable lobbyist running the FCC then as well.
Right, that was Thom Wheeler.
That's really what's at stake here.
Evan,
this debate about net neutrality, we have to change that entire corrupt system and ensure that public voices are heard, not just lobbyists.
Yeah, we have about 30 seconds left. What should people do? Where do they go to do it?
Go online right now, go to battleforthenet.com and call your lawmakers. That's the single most important thing you can do. If you can show up at a protest at a Verizon store in your area on December 7th, that's 1 week before the FCC votes, that'll be a big help too. You can find a protest near you at verizonprotests.com. Okay. And again, any specific names, or if people live in, if they're represented by Republicans, is it is it more important to call than if they're represented by Democrats? If your representative is a Republican, it's extra important that you reach out to them. If you run a small business or in any other way can show how this will directly affect you as a member, as a person in their district, those stories go a long way. So it's important for everyone to speak out, but if you live in a rural area or a Republican district, your voice is extra important.
Great. Evan Greer, thanks so much for being with us today, Evan.